Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Michael's Record Collection, where we talk about great music with the people who make it and the people who love it. I am happy to be joined for this episode by Shadow Circus guitarist John Fontana. John, how you doing?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about a new album from the Shadows, from Shadow Circus, and now I want to talk a little bit about that. We're going to start out now. You guys had Welcome to the Freak Room in '06. And then you came back with Whispers and Screams in 2009 and On a Dark and Stormy Night in 2012. Now I thought we had a deal every 3 years. Where you guys been since then?
Wow. I mean, that time flew. I mean, honestly, I thought I was just hunkering down to experiment with some new sounds and find some new things, and I blinked, and it was a decade later than I had expected. So sorry about that, but
Yeah, you broke the deal. That's fine. It's fine. But we're going to talk about that album a little bit. But before we get to that, I want to ask you what I typically ask my guests, which is, what was your first favorite record, John?
first favorite record was the first favorite rock record was Steve Miller Band Book of Dreams.
Hmm. Okay. And how did you come upon that album? Was it something in the house that your dad had, or did you just hear it on the radio and asked for it, or?
That was big on the radio when I was a kid, and so I've just dated myself there for whatever my hair dye might have hidden. I just gave away and undid. But
But at least you still have yours.
at least that's what it appears like. This could be a Zoom filter too. I mean, you can never underestimate how far technology has come.
I need that filter, obviously.
You look great. Works for you. Uh, so yeah, I mean, like Swingtown and songs like that were big on the radio at the time, and I remember particularly being drawn to the vocal harmony sound.
Hmm.
There was something really euphonic about it. It hit my ears in a really pleasurable way, and I wanted to keep hearing it over and over again. And my brother had the album, and I loved the album cover with that, like Pegasus,
Hmm.
surrounded with a rainbow. And it was like I was drawn to the look of it, the sound of it. And so my brother then gave me that album, and it was like the first album that was I could call mine.
Wow, nice of them.
No.
Now, are you from a musical family? Did you grow up with people playing musical instruments all around you, or did you sort of pioneer that in your family?
Well, I was the youngest of six kids, where all five who preceded me had pursued guitar, had bought guitars, took guitar lessons, but didn't stay with it. So when I was going to, so I might have even have delayed my inclination to get into it, figuring it was going to go down the same road as it did for my other siblings.
Hmm.
So, and I had really been begging for piano lessons, and I found myself drawn to the sound of keyboards and piano. Ultimately, we didn't have the kind of household that could had the room or the money to go get a piano and visit somewhere. And I knew that a Casio wasn't going to cut it for me. I was growing up with the sounds of Rick Wakeman and Moogs, so a Casio just wasn't going to cut it. As soon as I
Hmm.
heard that, hit that button and heard that cheesy samba rhythm, I was like, this is not what I mean by keyboards. So ultimately, when guitar came about, it was a new thing, and it was like, all right, let's see if Sean goes further with this than everybody else did.
Did you get like a hand me down from a brother or something?
Yep, I sure did.
Yeah.
I had an acoustic guitar that was found in our basement that had belonged to my oldest brother, so five siblings before me. So it was really old, and it was the action on that was so high that at the 12th fret, I mean, you could fit probably your whole hand between the so for the first couple of months that I was trying to play, I guess it was an exercise in finger strength, just trying to push down. Like I don't even think it was feasible to fret notes above like the eighth fret. Like it was just not even physically doable on that instrument.
Mm, wow. So how long did it take you to figure out that you had some aptitude for this instrument?
Uh, So was hanging out with a group of friends when I was in high school, and I had my first like Squire Strat, Red Strat, and they had a little amp, and I had the distortion pedal and a delay pedal, which for me unlocked the secrets of like the sounds of Jimmy Page and all this, like being able to play something and hear an echo continue it. That was wild for me.
Hmm.
uh, and and just so hanging out with friends who's like kind of only exposure to being in a group of people playing guitar with somebody strumming an acoustic. So I came in and cranked up the distortion and this delay pedal and just started playing kind of randomly fast stuff. Like I wasn't properly playing fast. I was just putting my fingers up high on the fretboard and just going like willy 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 willy.
Hmm.
And they were all like, whoa. And like and they were just like, and I was like, wow, they can be tricked into thinking I can actually play this thing. Like I felt like I was doing like some deceptive tricks to make it sound as if I could play, but they were really entertained by it. And then over time, I started slowing down behind the scenes and learning how to really do what I was making believe I could do. And I was like, wow, okay, this is working out all right.
So tell me about the transition from learning your instrument to Shadow Circus. Were there other bands along the way?
Lots, in fact. There was a whole era of music and playing in live bands for me, and that started around 1990 or 89 when I joined my first band, and we it was a cool band called Violet Love, and we played some cool places in the city. We played CBGBs
Hmm.
and some of the clubs that were around at the time. There was this great little club in the Lower East Side called Downtown Beirut. That was what probably one of the most fun gigs I've ever played was at that place. And that band was very much influenced by like Jane's Addiction, and we had this monstrous drummer. We had a crazy front man who used to do just like wild stuff on stage, and so it was aggressive, psychedelic, a lot of jam-based stuff that we were doing. We were really free to experiment. So yeah, that started, and so I played in the for the just about the entire decade of the 1990s. I was always playing in bands, playing clubs.
Now, did you guys put anything out, like to release anything?
Uh, no, we never got further than a demo with that band.
Mm.
Ultimately, there's the next band that I joined after that was called Persona Grata, and we have lots of recordings of that, but there was nothing that was released digitally. We were still dealing. That was still kind of out of reach in the early '90s,
Mhm.
and then it was in the late '90s, and the last of that category of bands that I was in called Omnilingus. We have a CD, which actually at some point here, and if we pause, I'll get up and find it. I actually have one or two copies of that.
Nice. So tell me about Shadow Circus. How did this form? How did you hook up with this particular group of musicians and start your journey down the progressive rock, you know, sort of genre?
Sure. So, I mean, to start with, progressive rock was the genre that got me excited about music. Like, kind of Steve Miller Band was a pretty good representation of it. I liked the accessible brand of it, whereas harmony vocals and Moog. So when I heard Yes, that was like really like obvious to me. I was like, Yes, perfectly fits this. It's the overall vibe of it was very appealing to me, and it took me a little longer to acclimate to like the more wild time signatures and keys, but ultimately I was full on into that and Emerson Lake and Palmer and all that. So Shadows, but however, in the context of the bands I was playing in the 90s, I didn't quite know how to get other musicians on board with that kind of idea.
Hmm.
It wasn't the hip thing.
Yeah.
I couldn't. there was really no place to play that, in the live settings we were playing. And if you did, you might have just risked just having a non-responsive audience. We were playing places that the demand for the kind of alternative rock I was playing at the time was big. So it was always kind of like a secret desire where I was like, man, I would love to write like a 20-minute long epic song with freaking beautiful climax and have something that's really orchestrated beautifully with all kinds of delicious keyboard sounds. But I couldn't afford to get any of those things. I just didn't have a network of people to do it. So fast forward to like around like 2002, I'm like, I got a computer and I got an audio interface and I got a MIDI controller, and I started discovering virtual software mellotrons and Moogs and Hammonds. And I'm like, so I rededicated myself to studying piano technique and keyboards again. And kind of like guitar took a little bit of a back seat. And I started doing that more and more and more. And then I decided at some point I wanted to get back and see if I could audition for a band, maybe playing this type of music. So but any of the recordings I had of Lingus or Persona Grata weren't going to get me in the door of a progressive rock band.
Yeah.
So I'm like, so I better record something that shows, I mean, I could, at the time I could play a bunch of like Yes and Rush songs, and I could play Mood for a Day. And I'm like, let me put together some recordings that I could use as a calling card and see if I can join a prog rock band.
Mm-hmm.
So I recorded a demo, and I set out to, and I auditioned for one guy who was putting together a prog rock project. And he was cool and he liked what he did, but when I recorded that, I played it for Dave, who's now the singer of Shadow Circus. And there was a melody in that piece that I wrote where he was floored. He was like, he like kind of just went and like he leaned, he kind of fell back against the wall of the room. He was like, I had no idea you wrote stuff like this. He's like, I've never met anybody who wrote stuff like this. And I was like, wow, I was really excited about it. And I was like, well, this is my calling card for auditions or whatever. And he was like, no, I know a drummer, and I know, and I have ideas for this. So I dropped the idea of auditioning, and he reached out to the drummer that he knew. That fell through, but I sent it to actually the drummer who was in Persona Grata, the band that I mentioned that I was in the early 90s. And he wrote back to me and said, well, I always wish that I could start a label where I could just sign anything I love, because I'm listening to this and I just love it. And I was like, do you want to come in and play on some stuff? So that's Corey, who is the drummer on the first two albums. So we actually just set out. We at that point just put out an ad for a bass player. Matt answered it. Zach Tenorio, a really talented young keyboardist. He was still going to school at the time. He was playing in the Paul Green School of Rock, and he had just been played shows with John Anderson. He had played Close to the Edge, performed with John Anderson. So I'm like, wow, this is the kid was outrageous. And so so that it was kind of on Dave's insistence that I didn't just use this music as a calling card, that it turned into Shadow Circus.
Wow. Now, so you said this was early 2000s, so it 2002-ish. It didn't take you guys long to put together Welcome to the Freak Room. How was that for you guys? I mean, was it a lot of experimentation, trial and error? I mean, you obviously have a much better idea of how to work as a band now, but that first one, I'm always curious as to how that first one came together. Like, was it a struggle, or did it come together pretty easily for you guys?
I mean, it was all fun and exciting. I was just learning to use a computer and to record and demo things. And so for me, a lot of that album just came out through having fun with the experimentation of it. So I always enjoy that discovery, kind of aspect of it. So that was fun. There was no pressure. There was no expectations.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, because we had no deadline. It wasn't until I had all the songs all demoed for it that we all just went in the studio and learned it, and we all just went into the studio like in a day and recorded all of the bass and drums, and just took a couple of weeks afterwards to get all of the guitars and vocals all and keyboards all neatened up. So I would say that was relatively easy.
Okay. Now, when you talked about this piece that you wrote that kind of floored your eventual lead singer David Bowick, did that end up on that first album?
Yes. So that is the melody that he heard, you can hear now in the middle of, it's in the second act of Journey of Every Man. So
Okay.
it's in the piece called Find Your Way. So it's you'll hear there's a melody that's played on a 12 string that's doubled with a 12 string doubled with a piano. And it's a very slow, pretty kind of bittersweet melody, um, which I think was a little bit influenced at the time by listening to Transatlantic and Neil Morris.
Okay. Yeah. So you flash forward, you had three albums out in 9 years. You mentioned there's this long delay before the fourth album, and can't wait to get into it with you. I want to start by kind of going back to what you and I were talking about before we hit the record button, which is, what was going through your mind? Why the long delay, and what were you up to between the third and fourth record?
So after the third record, there was somewhat of a period of introspection. We were about to play a a festival, which I won't say what the specific festival was,
Mm-hmm.
where we were really working hard to rehearse for that festival. And a lot of things were making it difficult for some of the band members to do that. Somebody was just going through kind of a family separation thing that was really kind of traumatic. I won't get into everybody's personal business, but there were a couple of people for whom it was extremely stressful to keep up with the demands of preparing for it. And at one point, I had just contacted the festival to say, "Hey, we're about to start thinking about making arrangements for this, and to get up there. So we just wanted to see what you were going to do, as far as helping us with our cab fare, basically, like what was the compensation or whatever." And they were like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh no, we don't compensate you," you know. And I was like, "Would have been nice to mention, maybe when you were asking us to get on board with that, and let us
Mm-hmm.
know that this was all going to be out of pocket." So we already had this very strange situation where everybody was trying to keep up with it, and then it was going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
So that, coupled with the fact that after that there was no follow up, like there wasn't anything that event was going to build to, because since we started this band, 5 Prague festivals stopped.
Yeah.
It's like it just name them, they just ended. And even several of the venues local to me um, closed. So I was like, wow. So having a live lineup and maintaining this live lineup, I was like, guys, even if we go out of pocket and go up and play this festival, there's nothing after it. Zero. I'm like, I really don't understand what we're working towards. So I said, let's pause and let's figure out what our goal really is. Like, where can the band go? You know? So in the act of pausing and doing that, and people start to get busy with other things, and then we're just like, you know what? We just want to experience something different. Let's let's kind of just reset and let us work on creating music that we love and that we feel and that's honestly us. And let's see what new experiences that connects us with. And one thing that I think was a watershed moment was when we saw a Devin Townsend project in Baltimore. And we were kind of like, the thing that I loved about Devin Townsend is he's singing about his mental health issues and addiction. And I'm like, so here's a very different take on progressive music, where he's not singing from the point of view of wizards and warlocks or abstract poetry that's impenetrable obfuscation of poetic ideas like John Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically saying, here's me, like bare in all my ugliness, and his audience loved it. And I was like, he's connecting in such an honest way with people. I was like, I want to do this. And one thing that was a big kind of shove in that direction is I had a mentor. His name was Ramsey Amin, who, and if there's some people who watch your program who are really hardcore avant-garde fans, he was a violinist for avant-garde pianist Cecil Taylor, who is an absolute maniac of a jazz avant-garde player. I mean, stuff that would make the most avant-garde sounding Magma or Henry Cow stuff sound like Bon Jovi. I mean, he was out of control. So Ramsey, was this violinist, and he actually had listened to our music, and I had reconnected with him because he was my math teacher when I was 7th grade. So through Facebook, kind of reconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of encouraged me along, and he saw what I was kind of struggling with and what I was figuring out what I wanted to achieve with music. And he said, and this was just, he passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, but obviously before then, he said, John, I know whatever you do with music is going to be honest. And I trust you to do that. And I think that in the process of doing that, part of it may have been that he was trusting me to do it, but it might have also been his way of saying, be honest.
Mm. Okay.
Excuse me, I got a cough. So thank you. So I set out to do so. I was like, you know what? Let's sing from the point of view of our personal experiences. Because before we were talking about literary references like Stephen King's The Stand, and the whole last album was based on Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
And we love those things. And we did those stories because they had themes that we connected with. So it's not like they were dishonest. We weren't just doing this in kind of a third person thing. Like, here's a story and we don't get this story, but we're going to tell it to you anyway. We did it because we had something personal in it too. But this album is really personal.
Okay. Then it's also a heavier album. So right from the jump, you can tell right away that this is a heavier album than what we're used to from you guys. Had you been listening to heavier music in recent years, or was there some new influence that was introduced other than you talked about Devin Townsend, who's obviously has very heavy music as well? What was on your mind?
A couple of things. We always loved heavier music, but we also, even throughout the making of this, loved the kind of symphonic stuff and keyboard-based music that we'd always done. So we can really, there's a very broad range of sounds we can pick from that still reflect us, honestly. We could have done a completely piano-based album or something even heavier, and it still would have been an honest reflection of us. So I think it kind of came with this, where it still has some of the elements, like, I still have some of the acoustic stuff in there. And it opens up with a 2-minute keyboard intro. So, we're showing, hey, we haven't abandoned everything.
Yeah.
We still have one foot in the prog world.
Yeah. And you have that atmospheric piece at the end, Second Star from the right.
Yeah. That was something, and there's more like that, so we thought that why not have an album that sounds like an album, so we're like, let's see what the common themes are here. So some of the things that transpired while we were writing it: the pandemic, extreme political turmoil, and all these things were really, there was a lot of anxiety and not just in ourselves, but in the world. So I'm like thinking back to watching Devin Townsend. I'm like, it really feels like there's something cathartic about heavier music that's really relevant to the way we felt while we were recording it, and kind of to the feeling we're getting from the world.
Hmm. Yeah. What about the lineup here? Have there been lineup changes since the last album? I know it's you and David as it's been from the beginning.
Yeah, so Dave and I have always been the core of it, and other members have come and gone. And we're still friends with just about everybody who's ever recorded on the Shadow Circus album. But during the recording of it, that was during the height of the pandemic.
Mm.
So a lot of people weren't accessible, and it wasn't a time when we could easily go and meet in a studio. So just in the year or so before we set out to begin recording, we had heard that Devin Townsend had disbanded Devin Townsend Project, and he had a post on Facebook that said, "Hey, here are these guys. I highly recommend them. Please hire them for your project. Love working with them." So so ultimately, when it came time to we're like, I wonder if this will even be possible. So I'd only had part of the album written, some of the songs done, and we reached out to Ryan Van Poeterijn, the drummer, and he said, "I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. Let's do it." He said, "But my availability is during this time frame, and then I don't know what's going to happen after that." So we're like, "Oh, we only have a couple of things written here," and I'm
Hmm.
like, I still had other sketches of ideas, so it kind of kicked me in the ass to get going, and ultimately we wanted the bass player too, who, forgive me if I'm not remembering his name, but he at the time wasn't available because he was opening a new restaurant or something up in Vancouver. But we were like, always loved Pain of Salvation, and felt like that was along a similar line of heavy prog, that, sometimes crossed the line into prog metal, but it still wasn't afraid to have keyboard based stuff, and it was still really dynamic,
Hmm.
And so, like, absolutely loved Gustav Hilm's work with Pain of Salvation, and reached out to him. And as it turned out, Ryan had worked with him on another project. Uh, and I'm like, if we're during the pandemic, we have to be able to work with people remotely, and it was the way everybody was recording. So we're like, you know what, this is fun. So they agreed to work with us, and they were very reasonable about they didn't charge us an arm and a leg to do it. They were really great. They had a lot of fun with it. And when I was talking to Ryan, I said, we're punching above our weight here working with you guys. You guys have toured the world. You've put out massive albums. You've played massive festivals. You've played sold out night after sold out night at Royal Albert Hall. I mean, we know what we're getting ourselves into. We know if somebody sees Dave and I working with these guys, we know everybody knows. Yeah, we hired these guys. We brought them in. I'm not going to make believe that they were beating our door down. Please let us play in Shadow Circus. Of course they were hired guns for this, but man, they were awesome. And I said, guys, put us to school. Show us how to make a great album.
Okay.
So
And I think that's part of where the heaviness comes from. Is this There's a lot more double kick drum than what we're used to from Shadow Circus, for example. In this, the drumming is heavy in addition to the crunch from the guitar, and of course the soloing and all of that it's a little bit heavier than what we're used to. But it doesn't it doesn't stray miles away. I think David reins in some of the theatricality of his vocals on this album as well, and that's again part and parcel of what you talked about before, making it a personal and honest um, record is going to naturally make you gravitate towards those kind of choices rather than singing about Captain Trips, for example.
yeah, yeah, it's no longer say he. Yeah, I mean, in Captain Trips, he would sing, and throughout all of a lot of the songs on Project Blue, and on the second album, he actually sings for that song from the point of view of a virus,
Mm.
and he sings another song from the point of view of Trash Can Man,
Mhm.
and other characters in the story, and and so yeah, I mean, he has a theater degree, and that was one of the things that he came in with. But this was he found kind of similar paths where, for instance, Into the Fire is a dialogue between him and his anxiety, and he sings from the point of view, like he kind of personifies his anxiety, and his anxiety saying, let's jump into the fire together, come on, let's ride,
Mhm.
and taking him on this unpleasant ride, so still a little element of that, but yeah, it's honest. There isn't a line on this album that isn't something that he or we haven't felt.
So you and David do a lot of the writing. You get a lot of the writing credits throughout the history of the band. I'm assuming, based on what you've said so far in this interview, that a lot of this is you writing the music and David adding the lyrics. Is that correct, or is it a little bit of a combination?
That's the basis of it. There's been a little bit more cross pollination on this album than in others, but you know, for instance, one thing that I realized, like before, I used to be like very protective of my solos, and wanting that to be a domain that I had all to myself. And Dave has this mystifyingly good ear. Like it's scary good. Like, and I would say, since this album we had to do it like kind of, we couldn't go into the studio with a full band and kind of get the live feel of the album. So I would be like, hey, come over and let me play solos for you. So at least I'm getting the feeling of a performance, and I'm feeling like what it's like telling a musical story with a solo, and so he would watch and he would say, yes, but in this part it's a bit fiddly and it sounds like it could use some direction here. So I'd be like, okay, and then he might say something about another part, and I'd be like, well, I kind of really liked what I did there, but all right. Every single piece of feedback he gave me that I actually kind of just gave up my ego and tried turned out way better.
Hmm.
So I was just like, at one point I was like, I can't finish this solo because you haven't given me feedback on it yet. Like I
Mhm.
went from do not touch my solos and do not tell me how to solo to I don't consider it done until I've heard from Dave about it.
Yeah, give me a sign off here on this one. Do you like it? Just what can I change here, make it better?
Yeah, because it was just he's making it better. I have to. What good is my ego gonna do if I'd be better if I let that go.
Yeah. All right. So talking about soloing, who inspires you as a soloist? Who are some of the guys who, or maybe it's just what you hear in your inner ear. What is your approach to soloing?
So I mean my earliest influence came from Jimmy Page, and I mean it was the anything off of the first two Zeppelin albums is kind of like where my love for guitar soloing was born. And if you watch, the song remains the same, and he breaks out the violin bow. I'm like, I like solos that have a kind of visceral emotional quality to them. David Gilmour, I love soaring melodies.
Mm-hmm.
um, I would rather hear a single soaring note that you don't know when it's going to stop than to do something that is metronomically impressive, like and there's some things like that. I still like speed. I like players like Ingve, and there's a couple of moments here, I'd say like in particular on A New Death. There's a moment in there where I was like, let me just try to do something ferociously fast and see where it could go. So there's a moment of it on there. But yeah, for me, so David Gilmour, Jimmy Page, and then more recently, I think I've kind of refined the structure of soloing by influence of Ritchie Blackmore. And I studied and learned a lot of his solos note for note while developing the solos for this album.
Hmm, okay. It's funny that you brought up Song Remains the Same. It's so weird. I hadn't seen it in years. I literally watched it last weekend.
Oh, awesome.
So it's pretty fresh in my mind. Um, Now this record is 8 songs, 47 minutes. It's not this sprawling transatlantic Flower Kings hour and 15-minute type thing. Was that an intentional choice on your part to keep this thing sort of a little bit more brief and try to say more in less time?
Yeah, I mean, we went for more, and there's a couple of ideas that we recorded, and even that Ryan and Gustav had recorded parts to that didn't make it onto the album. Because ultimately, we felt that this group of songs was telling a good story about this era, of our creative lives, and we had something in there that for the people there are some people who listen to this that say, well, I kind of miss the sound of the last album, and they might have been really overjoyed at the other had we included one or two of the other things that didn't make it. I had one thing on there that was kind of like Son of Willoughby, that was
Oh
like
yeah.
this kind of big, very keyboard based, very proggy, lots of changing time signatures. And I kind of felt like it was the odd stepchild when put next to the other stuff on this album. I was like, these seem to tell a cohesive story and a cohesive sound. So I'm like, let's do this. This family of songs forms a nice happy family with the ending Second Star being the one thing where I said, that's a little risky. This is something different, but that one had some significance for me as the last song on the album. That it was, like each, and I'm sorry if my thoughts meandered for a moment, but each album has ended on something a little different. And so I thought that was a good thing, because then it kind of, and each album has begun with something related to the ending of the previous album.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I feel like we're telling an overarching story with everything we do.
Mentioned Second Star, the closing track. It's one of my favorites on the album. Even like you said, it's a little different in terms of the feel of it. And what I love about it is, though, that it does work as this sort of denouement to the album, right? It's this hard and heavy album for the most part. Still some progressive elements, as you mentioned, still some keyboards in there, some little bit of acoustic guitar here and there. But by and large, it's a very aggressive, for Shadow Circus, an aggressive album. And then you get to this end, and it does kind of come off as, all right, we've just put you through 7 songs of this. Now we're gonna decompress here before we let you go.
Yeah, mood wise, it's a big shift, and it's somewhat intentional. I mean, that song, we allowed each song to come about on its own, merits and on its own inertia. So if we paused for a moment and said, which one of these things is not like the other, or just like, it kind of bookends the album, because like I noted before, the opening track Vampires begins with a 2-minute keyboard intro, so I was like, so there's a little bit of a book ending here, but yes, it goes somewhere. And the story of Second Star, I think, is important to the whole album, because that's what I don't know if you recognize the phrase second star to the right
It's
and
a Peter
straight on.
Pan reference.
Yeah. So second star to the right and straight on till morning, is how you get to Neverland, where you go and avoid ever aging and ever growing old. The album's a midlife crisis. The album is I want to play those power chords. We're all getting on in age. We want to rock. We're rocking out. We're kind of, there's a little bit of a sign of, hey, it's like a bringing the youthful feelings out into the surface, and the kind of aggression and the kind of um, the kind of fight against mortality, of aging, of getting old. And, it's like, so the album is kind of, so that song is kind of like the confession of everything that came before it. It's like, I don't want to age. I want to play through a wall of Marshalls. I want to, play power chords.
Excuse me, getting over a little illness.
Oh
we had to,
no.
we had to postpone our original interview because I fell sick for the first time in probably a year.
Oh
But
no, sorry.
but I'm on the mend now. But John, you and your band, you guys have always approached these albums, I feel like, with a great deal of forethought and care. I feel like you guys sweat the details before you get going. So you've got things like the massive song cycle based on Stephen King's The Stand. You've got this entire Wrinkle in Time um, concept album. What were you mentioned some of the themes that you brought into this, but how much of this of the lyrical ideas are discussed before lyrics are written, or are they at all? Do you guys think about the things that you want to say and then David writes them, or does David just write them and maybe you tweak them a little bit?
In this case, we started to play around with what could possibly be a concept. We knew that we wanted to do something where individual songs could stand out for a few reasons. One, we wanted to have a different experience. So we're like, let's see how we are with like creating individual songs that are each really unique from one another. Part of it is because I thought I was getting away with something by doing that. Where, like, for example, on Dark and Stormy Night, Overture was composed last and consists of themes from the whole album. I think it is simultaneously one of the best things I've ever written, and I think I was cheating
Hmm.
because I basically was able to say, let me grab a theme from Daddy's Gone. Let me grab a theme from Camazotz. Where can I fit in a theme from Uriel? And I was able to put them together and really happy with the way it turned out. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever written. But I kind of felt like I was pulling something over somebody's eyes, where I'm like, I was allowed to repeat themes. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Let me pull out a
Like you're
theme.
plagiarizing yourself almost.
Yeah, where I'm like, writing a new song, but writing a concept album, you can write a new song and you give yourself license to recycle ideas from other songs. So I mean, I could explain that away in creative ways, and it actually works really well in creative ways where I could say this was the Red-Eyed Man's theme. And if you'll notice on all the parts of the story where he surfaces, there's certain melodies and chord progressions that recur, so I'm like, so it's cool in that way, but I felt like it would be an interesting challenge to say no. Every song has to stand entirely on its own 2 feet.
Hmm. It's interesting to hear you say that. I, not being a songwriter, I being a big Neil Morse fan, almost everything this guy does has an overture. I just assumed overtures were always written like that. Like they always came from like, let me find the bits that are going to come back later and stitch them together in a new way to kind of introduce them, even though I've already written the other stuff. That's kind of what I thought was the case, but you're telling me that's not how it works usually.
No, that's how you write
Okay.
an overture. You can't
Okay.
write an overture until, and in fact, it was funny because we were all rehearsing that album to record it, and everyone's like, John, the overture is not done. And I'm like, that's because the album's not done. I can't have an overture until we have the rest of the album. So,
Okay.
so that was fun. No, you understood it perfectly well.
Okay.
Yeah, you.
Well, sometimes a broken clock is right. But that's great. So let's talk about the songs. Vampires, I think, is the perfect choice as the opener. It kind of eases the Shadow Circus fan into what you're going to hit them with throughout the record by having that keyboard intro and everything. Um, what were the themes that you and David talked about in terms of that particular song lyrically, and And was it the first song you wrote? Is that why it ended up first, or just was the one that seemed to fit there the best?
Uh, so initially, there there was a concept that I was toying around with when I set out to write some things, and I had initially thought that maybe we could pull themes from fairy tales. And with the idea being of taking things like Cinderella and the Pied Piper and Little Red Riding Hood, and I'm like, maybe we can kind of do modern views of these things. Like, I remember I had one song on the album which still exists in some form called The Glass Slipper, which was sort of like a modern story of unrequited love, but told with the metaphors of the Cinderella story,
Mm.
of that all someone is left holding is this glass slipper, and where'd she go? So I was trying to tell a heartbreaking modern story that alluded to a fairy tale. So I was like, so I didn't want to do like, but so there are some relics of that throughout it, and I wanted the opening of this album to sound like what you would want to be playing if you were opening a big giant old Grimm's fairy tale storybook. So hence the musical box,
Okay.
and the theme that opens the album. So that was a little a bit of something left over from there, but I felt like it harkened back to Dark and Stormy Night, and I knew that we were going to be jumping with both feet into this heavy sound with this. So, like you said, I'm like, I knew a lot of people would listen to this album and say, "Oh, they're more hard rock than prog now," and I'm like, well, how about we open with a 7.5 minute song with a 2 minute keyword intro and an even longer instrumental break, and then say, we're not straying that far.
Mhm.
We still very much are inspired by prog, even if we stray from it.
Yeah. And with it, these titles, the first couple, Vampires and a New Death, you guys are kind of known for being a little bit out there, a little bit macabre, a little bit, some science fiction. You've done Twilight Zone stuff. You've obviously done Stephen King stuff. Welcome to the Freak Room has got some, some stuff on it that's kind of a little bit out there as well in terms of what's different. I mean, it kind of living up to that Shadow Circus name. It's a name of the name of your band is a little mysterious, a little dark, and maybe even a little creepy. But in all the right ways that sell horror movies and things like that. So these first two song titles, if you're looking at it and you're a Shadow Circus fan, you see these and you go, oh, okay, this is going to be great. It's going to be just like all the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I when I first thought of the theme of doing fairy tales, I was kind of like, yeah, we always have this, like, so yeah, there's the Shadow Circus brand. We always, the name itself was inspired by Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes,
Mm-hmm.
which for Dave and I is one of our favorite stories and books, and 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 we're like, so kind of coming from that angle, and realizing that we were coming from an area where Prague was happily coexisted with hard rock, with like things like early Alice Cooper, and in recent times with bands like Ghost, and
Mm.
Ghost would never throw around the term prog. They were a massive influence on us during this, because they have some really moogie instrumentals on their stuff, and I'm like, oh, Tobias Forge absolutely is a prog fan. You totally get it. So I like this area. You can play with dark, but you can play with dark in a friendly way, and
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too because Ghost kind of rose during that whole time that you guys were, you know, making the record, but also before you started making the record when you really weren't sure what was next for you guys. So it's kind of a modern day signpost for where you guys are in terms of your influences and stuff. So it of course the stuff that they do is darker and macabre, but it's also fun and very much tongue in cheek at times. So it works on that level, just like your ode to the Willoughby, the Twilight Zone stuff is fantastic. You could probably do several albums worth of just Twilight Zone songs.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, love Willoughby, and like I said, I have more stuff like that. But yeah, yeah. It's a blast. It's fun to do, And at first, one of the themes that I thought of for like an overarching concept for the album was I was like, confronting things that are dark. It seems like in the effort to refine the world and how we look at things, it seems like I have sometimes felt that it was counterintuitive to kind of avert our eyes to things that are dark, because I think in doing so you end up those things tend to invite themselves in unexpected ways, in your psyche, like, and I'll make a really far out reference here. I don't know if you're familiar with a horror movie called The Babadook.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It's really interesting, and it wasn't what I expected. It's super scary, um, but it's all a sort of allegory for Carl Jung's whole theory of the shadow self and how you have to acknowledge the shadow self. And
Mm.
other prog musicians have caught on to this. Tools 46 and 2. The lyrics deal with kind of confronting the shadow self, meaning the dark side of you. If there's something upsetting to you. And so the thing that was happening in that movie was the woman had a husband who passed away, and she was blocking it out of her mind. But then this terrifying creature would appear out of surprise at unexpected moments and haunt them. And it kind of became an allegory for her grief that she was burying. And ultimately, she finds a place in the basement for this creature to live. And she brings it food and like keeps it in the basement behind a locked door, but she acknowledges it. She allocates a space to it.
Yeah.
And then she lives harmoniously with her grief. So I kind of said, that was the thing with the fairy tales, is I was like, Grimm's fairy tales, and like old, oh my god, German fairy tales,
Very dark.
very dark. Now the Pied Piper, that's the theme of one of the songs. Well, you're going down the line, so I'll wait until
Yep.
you get. Let's put a pin in that topic
All right.
until you
So
get to
tell me about A New Death. Which fairy tale were you exploring there?
Okay, New Death was not a fairy
Not
tale,
a
and
fairy
that's
tale.
no, and that's why the fairy tale stuff was just there are remnants of it, but
Hmm.
we didn't go with that as a concept. A New Death is about the mental torment that Dave, the lyricist, and I could relate to, went through during the pandemic.
Hmm.
It's very specifically, it refers to, I want to mention any divisive figures, but it refers to a specific figure who was prominent during that time, who was a source of a lot of grief, and the kind of waking up every day. There's like in the beginning of that, it was like, now this person has died from it. Now this person has died from it. Now this person has died from it. And it
Yeah.
was the idea of every day a new death. That this was the abuse our psyche was taking.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when Meatloaf passed, for example. It was like non-vaccinated and all that. And it was a frightening time. I had previously at a previous job, I had worked with emergency physicians, and I was seeing photos of gurneys stretched down the hall, and it was eerily similar to like the early stages of the Stand, the miniseries.
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of allusions to that. So everything that we went through with that, and then the kind of breakdown of empathy. We watched the breakdown of empathy in society, where it was just seeing how far people were collectively willing to go to stand behind, to stand against showing. I had thought when the pandemic first started, I said, thank God this will be the end of partisanism. Partisanship. I said, finally, everyone's going to band together. I'm like, this will be like Albert Camus' The Plague. I don't know if you know that book, but I'm like,
Mm.
there's a town full of terrible, selfish people, and the plague came, and they all worked beautifully and harmoniously together. And then the moment that the plague was over, a gunshot went off, and everybody was back to being,
Mm.
it's French, of course, very dismal view of
Yeah.
humanity.
Yeah. But in
Um,
this case, it seemed like it was going that way. And then people decided they'd had enough, even though circumstances hadn't changed. They just decided to heck with it. We're just going to go about our lives. And
they had fatigue from it, and
yeah.
there were also people goading that fatigue into coming to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that there were certain aspects of it where people may have remained empathetic and appropriately careful. Um, I think there were obviously a lot of missteps of leadership then, where they discouraged people from using masks because they don't want them to use up all the masks that were
Mm-hmm.
needed by healthcare. So that led to a lot of confusion and just telling everybody else to hole up indoors while healthcare tries to keep everybody from dying. I mean, look, it was unprecedented. There was nothing like that before in our lives that we could compare it to. And and just the idea that they were trying to avoid a situation where you didn't have places to help people who had heart attacks or got into car accidents anymore,
Mm-hmm.
where they were trying not to overwhelm the system. But
Yeah.
then when it started getting characterized as just a plot to control everybody, and once you go down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole, it's just like, oh no, man,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. It got very ugly, and some of that ugliness has unfortunately remained behind and persists to this day. I don't know if we're going to get beyond it, but at some point people just need to realize that we're all made of the same stuff. We all got way too much in common, way more in common than we have differences. So maybe just shut up and help each other rather than be selfish bastards.
It's yeah. I mean, it's sad, and it's it's there's we the internet giveth and the internet taketh away. We found community. You and I met on a community for fans of Spock's Beard,
Yeah.
and formed a lot of great friendships out of that have, and that 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 meeting, online meeting, that forum led to the birth of Shadow Circus, and so the great things have come out of it, and we wouldn't have, the band like this would never get signed to a real label, in the absence of the internet, it wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So good things come out of it, but it also allows really bad ideas to take hold and form communities around them as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's jump into the fire. Into the fire. You've already talked a little bit about this. Is David at having a discussion with his anxiety?
Exactly. So it's a dialogue. Yeah, it couldn't really summarize it any more succinctly than that. It's a conversation. The verses are sung from the point of view of the individual suffering and trying to cope, and the choruses are the anxiety gleefully taking over that person's self control and tormenting them.
And was this the basic 2020 anxiety of what's going on with the pandemic? Was there something deeper or more personal involved with this?
More deep, more personal. So getting into it, like the way Devin Townsend's stuff just talks from an honest point of view, and just saying, what we want, hearing music sung by people who go through what you go through is a big relief. And sometimes you look for a tonic where you're like, I'm depressed, I need something cheerful. And sometimes, and if you ever met or tried to help somebody who is going through like really, really nasty depression, sometimes that bafflingly has no effect, or is has a completely opposite effect of upsetting that person more. If you've dealt with anybody with depression, or anybody on like, an autism spectrum or anything like that, like trying to simply snap them out of it with something happy isn't really helpful. And here's an interesting thing that occurred to me when we were like, you know what, sing openly about your feelings, Dave. Like go ahead. And he's not, and he's doing great. He's not like, somebody who's having a really hard time every day. It is like everybody else. Stuff he deals with and sings about it honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Think about depression in the history of rock and roll. Heartbreak Hotel, Elvis Presley. I'm so lonely I could die. How vague is that? Like
Pretty strong statement.
and song was huge. You would
Yeah.
think, and that was unheard of at that time. But
Yeah.
Black Sabbath's Paranoid, Solitude,
I mean,
and
you're right, because sometimes you just want to know that there are other people out there that are experiencing what you're experiencing so that you don't feel that isolation on top of what you're feeling.
right, and seeing other people happy and singing happy, and like realizing this for people I've known who experience this, seeing other people happy, and like, going in, and for people who are having a rough time and going on a social media where everybody is discouraged from sharing anything hurtful or personal. Who wants to see that? We just want to see your kittens and your food and your vacation. Then it's created this environment where you're like, is this how I'm supposed to always feel? Because I don't. And
Mm-hmm.
so realizing that the way, like, artists who sing honestly about their feelings, like I found with Devin Townsend, was like, people are like, man, this song sums up exactly what I said. And I will tell you, out of anything anyone has written or said about this new album, there was somebody who, a completely new fan, who arrived at our Facebook page, and I posted into the fire. I just posted it, the link to it on Spotify, because that song got picked up as having the most plays of any song on the album. We
Mm.
never did a video for it. We never paid to promote it. I had never posted it or shared it before. It just got picked up and had like thousands of plays. Um, and so I posted that saying, hey, this area, people who listen to the song, we never promoted it. And somebody responded, completely new fan, said, I'm so glad I found your music. It says exactly what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, home run, not a home run that you're having a hard time. I'm not
Right.
celebrating that. I'm just glad we could be here for you for it.
Yeah. And you struck a nerve with somebody and you touched their soul. And that's, I mean, as an artist, that's gotta be one of the pinnacles of achievement.
Absolutely. And you can't do that merely singing stories that have already been written, or merely with a blazingly fast 64th note triplet guitar solo. It's got to come from the heart to do that.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. You talk about you can't really cheer someone up with happy music. It just demonstrates how far away they are from feeling that way. I think it makes things worse. It's kind of why a big chunk of my college life was spent listening to heartbreak songs. It's like, just getting over somebody. I'm drinking beer and listening to the Gin Blossoms' New Miserable Experience and things like that.
There you go. I'm sorry you went through that.
I think all young men go through
Yes,
that.
this is true. This is true. And that's why. And I think that is why it is universal, and it's a dependable place to go, and to realize, yeah, we're all, if there's somebody out there who's really having a totally easy time, they're a genetic anomaly.
Yeah, yeah,
You're not, it's really, you're not, if you're feeling stuff and you're feeling bad, you're, for all of us who feel something, yeah, that's not the thing that's unusual. It'd be unusual is the unicorn who's missing the part of their amygdala that experiences those things.
Yeah, I mean, it is like life since the beginning of time. Life has been a struggle. We have mitigated a lot of the physical struggles, but the mental ones are still there. We
Absolutely.
we don't spend 90% of the day hunting for our dinner anymore. We just go to the grocery store or go through a drive-through, but we still deal with the same relationship things and existential crises and things like that.
Absolutely. So yeah. So I'm really happy with that choice and direction. And like my old mentor Ramsey Amin, who I mentioned, said, you really can't make a mistake by being honest.
That's good advice. Good advice. Let's jump into Moonshine Haze. What was going on with it? Was that one of your fairy tale songs?
No, that one is about our favorite strain at the time of marijuana.
Okay. All
It's
right.
legal. It's legal here in New Jersey. It's a so how is this relevant? Self-medication. So it and it's a part of the concept of the honesty and of coping.
Mm-hmm.
That is the tonic for what is experienced in Into the Fire.
Okay.
And it and is that is and if you and that song is sung from a sort of joyful, blissful point of view. It's sort of the island of relief.
Yeah. Well, that is a legitimate medical treatment for anxiety.
It is for some,
Yeah.
and the right strain, you know. So
Yeah. And I tell you, like everybody copes with things in different ways. I found during the pandemic that I was doing a lot of retail therapy. I was buying box sets. I was running up credit cards. I was trying to surround myself with nice things that I wanted to make myself feel better in some way.
yeah, I you know what? I ran up my musician's friend in Sweetwater Music cards, and I've got two Moogs here that I bought during they're sitting just to my left. There's some guitars hanging on this wall. So yeah, I mean, fortunate that we were able to express some of her anxieties that way. But
Yeah,
yeah, that gets expensive though.
it does. I'm not sure it's any healthier than self-medicating or anything like that. But that's that I recognized it and I kept doing it even though I recognized it. But I was at least a little more able to control it from that point on. I was just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like on Amazon constantly. What is the deal?
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I had thought that it had fit in with the idea of with the ideas we were going for on this because I'm like, yeah, it is out of the need to provide a comfort to yourself.
Yeah. So we flip over to side two. If you got this on vinyl. By the way, are you putting out a vinyl for this?
If there's demand, we would love to, and we designed the album cover to be on vinyl. But there would have to, if there's a demand for it, we would happily do that.
So it's the title track would start off the second side. It's From the Shadows. Tell me a little bit about this one.
This is, to me, was one of the weirdest songs, and I struggled with it. It initially sounded very different, and at one point, like I was really enjoying playing like the kind of fast rhythms that they played on like I'll See the Light Tonight, and I was learning this kind of fast rhythm picking, and I was experimenting with it, and I had come up with some ideas that I really liked, and I came up with this. I ultimately found this sequence of chord changes with it that were just a joy to play. And once I started playing them, I couldn't stop. Like I had to finish the song. Like I couldn't play a verse and put the guitar down. I was like, no, this now just has to go into the pre-chorus. This now has to play the chorus. And I'm like, it just all happened. And I was like, and I challenged myself to do a solo on this that was written around chord changes that are more similar in like guitar instrumentalist albums like Joe Satriani or Steve Vai, where I was like, let me just give it this kind of like a melodic movement that I can solo over very melodically, and then a groove to just do some laps over it that I could just really have fun in solo. So for me, that was just like a fast, uh, kind of fun guitar piece where I was just having a blast playing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it came from there. And as far as the lyrics to it, it kind of followed suit. Into the Fire is kind of this wrestling with depression. Moonshine Haze is kind of the tonic for the depression. And From the Shadows was that kind of feeling of like kind of joy that you can experience when you do have those moments where you've overcome the things that are very dark.
Mm.
So that's why. So it really, From the Shadows doesn't mean there's something scary coming from the shadows. It's like I was in the shadows, now I've emerged from it.
Yeah. Well, spoiler alert, this is of the 8 songs on the record, this is one of my favorites. And the other two are Vampires, Second Star from the Right. So you've got high point, beginning, middle, and end for me.
Wow, that's so cool. Thanks. I'm really really glad that this song grabbed you. I had so many mixed feelings about it because I was like, this is just such a guitar gymnasium for me that I wondered if I was being too indulgent with it. I was like, to me, it was the least proggy sounding. So I'm really really happy. It's really fun and satisfying to take a risk with something and then it connects with
Well, as
somebody.
a
So
as a Dream Theater fan, I'm not immune to or not averse to self indulgence at all.
awesome.
Here's now you telling me about some of the themes from this record makes this next title a little more um, it brings a little clarity to it. It's Through the Witching Hour, but also in parentheses, Misery Inside.
Yeah. So this is kind of like a sort of return to the themes of Into the Fire. This is again something about dealing with an internal a conflict and just really talking honestly. It's another one of those explorations of complete honesty. Um, and interestingly enough, that was a song that was written an acoustic fingerstyle piece when I was heavily studying Lindsey Buckingham. And
No kidding.
yeah, so I originally wrote that. It was originally recorded completely with fingerstyle acoustic guitar. And it was in the last 2 months of recording that one day I felt like this sounds like it doesn't belong on the album. It just sounds like it's sitting out on its own. And one day I found this I'm a really big fan of, and I know you're gonna have a half a dozen prog fans click the back button when I say this, but I'm a huge fan of early Def Leppard, and I love the rhythm guitar work of Steve Clark, their original
Yes. Yes.
guitarist.
Yes.
And he had this clean chorus sound that you heard on songs like "Bringing On the Heartache" and "Foolin'" and all those early songs. And I was like, and one day I was just like, let me see if I can get a sound somewhere in that range. And I was like, wait a minute. And then I played the progression that I had been doing fingerstyle, but I did it just with the flat pick and with that clean chorus, like kind of Steve Clark sound. And it just hit me on the gut, where I was like, oh man, that's deep. And I was like, and every time I recorded it and I was like, it was such a last minute change, but I couldn't, it went from the song that I was wondering if we would have to cut because it didn't make any sense in the context of the sound of the rest of the album to at the last minute becoming one of my favorites.
Great. I would never bag on anybody for being a Def Leppard fan. Huge fan of Def Leppard and rock in peace, Steve Clark.
Yeah, absolutely. It was brilliant.
That brings us to the one you started to tell me about, Pay the Piper. So you were starting to tell me a little bit of a story about this one. Go ahead and complete it.
Sure. So yeah, this was uh I I had just bought a new bass to It's actually not. It wasn't a fancy bass. It was just like a $200 bass from uh, I forget what the online. So Rondo Music. It was a Rondo Music bass, which, by the way, makes great stuff really cheap. And I don't have an affiliate link for you. I'm sorry. You'd have to go call Rondo Music if you want that before you post this. But so I was having fun going back and playing some like Steve Harris stuff from Iron Maiden.
Nice.
And I'm like, and I was really digging on the kind of arpeggios he was playing at like the beginning of like a lot of the intros of the songs, like "Hallowed Be Thy Name" and "To Tame a Land," And of
Mhm.
course, Maiden has always been something in the back of our minds because they're also our forefathers in literary references in music.
A lot of literary references in their music. Yes.
So we were always able to kind of like say, yeah, that's really cool what they did, and they drew a lot of attention to the literary references. But in any case, I was like, just having fun playing like some Steve Harrisy kind of stuff, and I started coming up with this thing, and I wrote that song on the bass, uh, and um, and when I went back to do, and I also knew at that time that Alex Ripetti, who's an engineer and who played bass on that song, that he was a big fan of that kind of metal style of bass playing and that he could play it really well. And I was like, let me write a really fun part for Alex to play, and give him like a really cool Steve Harrisy kind of bass intro to sink his teeth into. So I went and did that. And so musically, that's where it came from. And ultimately, the musically, the guitar part came from me listening to a lot of Adam Jones from Tool, and having that kind of chugging, like kind of hammering off, like kind of guitar part that's like feels like it's moving in slow motion while being really kind of tricky at the
Mm.
same time. Uh, and um, and I had heard the vocal of the chorus in my head. So I gave Dave the chorus that I heard, and I'm like, this is how this has to go. And I gave him the theme, and he's like, I don't know that story. I don't know the Pied Piper. So he went and he watched the movie and he read the story, and he came up with it. And I, so yeah, it is just a note. It's derived from one of the darker earlier versions of the story. There's the lighthearted version of the story most people would tell their kids today is the Pied Piper just led the kids away and they went happily trotting along. In this early dark version of the story, and what is the story that's around the town of Hamelin, Germany, where something actually did take place, is that those kids were led to their death and they were drowned in a river. So we did a lyric video for it that actually, here's something I didn't know. I always thought it was just a fairy tale. I thought it was just an object lesson about paying your debts and being
Hmm.
honest. I did not know until we finished recording the album that it is based on an, a legendary event that it's in like the town ledgers and in diaries that a piper came to this town and led the children of the town away. And there's even a record later in the town's history that says it's been 100 years since our children disappeared. So that creeped me the f out when I
Yeah.
heard that.
Yeah.
So I did a lyric video on it. So I was like, wow, this is wild. So yeah. So it ended up being even darker than we thought. And getting back to why it's a bad idea to do a concept album based on especially German fairy tales is you will have an album based on kids dying horribly.
Yeah. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
a not a not a not a good concept.
Lot of unhappy fairy tales. Hansel and Gretel leaps to mind. Yeah, not
Yeah, it did not turn out well to them. I mean, you picture two kids with pigtails kind of skipping through, but that's not how it turned out for them, is it?
no, it's not. So it's interesting that you started that with the Steve Harris thing in mind, because of obviously, although Iron Maiden is a new wave of British heavy metal band, a classic one at that, also a lot of progressive rock leanings in what they do.
Yeah, yeah, and that's always where we've come from. I think there's we were always in a category of being rock and hard, sometimes harder, sometimes softer, where prog is one of the ingredients we love bringing in. You know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we already talked a little bit about Second Star from the Right. It's like I said, I look at this song as it's just a denouement again. You have or an epilogue, if you will. It is you've got this sort of aggressive album that is a little bit heavier than what we're used to from Shadow Circus, and then at the end you let us kind of decompress, relax, unwind with this more atmospheric piece, and it's a gorgeous piece. I think it's one of my favorite Shadow Circus songs of the four albums.
wow, thank you very much. That's a huge compliment. Um, when you asked me earlier about how the band started, and it basically started with that melody that grabbed Dave in Journey of Every Man. When I played that piano part for him, he had said that was the first thing that hit him like that melody did. Where
Mm.
he said he said it's heartbreaking. It makes me feel like I want to cry. Like he and I was so blown away, by his response to that. I'm like, okay, you know,
Yeah.
and and that was the other. I guess that was the second thing that made it through, where it was like a little bit of a fairy tale theme that I wanted to represent a real feeling instead of just like telling a story about a kid in London.
Yeah. What I like about it too is that there's a vibe to it that's a little sad, but also hopeful. And the two of those things coexisting in the same song is, I mean, it's a remarkable achievement, but it's also unusual.
Yeah, and that song for me is kind of like like I said, it's a summary for what brought us to this album and things we felt during this album, and a feeling of wanting to grab life. Like I know one thing that sentiment we've always had is, I've had friends who I used to play in bands with, or who I knew were talented musicians when I was younger, and where I'd kind of be like, hey, so and so, how's the guitar playing? They'd be like, oh man, I'm this many years old, I can't make time for that anymore. And where people kind of took owning their age as a sign that they were supposed to stop loving their life,
Mm.
and I saw this as a pattern, and I'm like, and for me it was a little sad, and I think that, look, there's things that can make that happen that are out of your control. To really keep on having a good time, you've got to have your health. Big thing. Nobody who runs into a health problem is making a decision to not enjoy their life. It's something rough happens, but that idea there are people who, I know people who are perfectly fine health, who are make really great money and choose to look at anything that's like kind of enjoyable, like making music, or like, and having art in your life, as something that's a sign of immaturity somehow.
Mm.
So part of this, and I know for me and definitely for Dave, was kind of the view of, no, you don't you can be you as long as you want and can be you, and there's right before the guitar solo, you hear a voice screaming in the background, grow up, grow up. And then the solo just soars, and that's kind of like, virtually the ship that sails above the clouds in Peter Pan, taken over. It's just like, No, fuck growing up. I'm I'm soaring into the clouds with the pirate ship,
Yeah.
and
You can't lose your sense of play. I mean, you don't, not just playing instruments, but just playing. I mean, playing games, go out, shoot some hoops, whatever it is that you enjoy. Um, you can't, you can't lose that sense of fun and wonder in your life.
absolutely, and the thought came back in a way, like, thinking about the holidays, because, like, I was having a conversation with somebody recently where we were talking about, like, the kind of tired old sentiment when people are like, holidays are really just for the kids, and I'm like, you should see our house decked out at Christmas time. At Halloween time, forget about it. It's freaking nuts here. It's a Halloween town.
I'm not surprised that you go big on Halloween.
Absolutely, and Christmas too. I mean, it's lit up down there, and kind of looking at it like, so well, of course it seems like it's just for the kids if you think that being over 40 means you're not allowed to have toys anymore, or that you can't enjoy the songs that bring back fun memories, or like, just insist that your life be fun. And which is also kind of an idea of the tonic for some of the struggles the album talks about. The other, it's not a one. We never wanted it to be a one-dimensional album. Like, let's make an album about depression. It's about de- depression. And one thing I didn't say about vampires, that, by the way, just quickly fast forwarding to the beginning, big allegory for being a victim of bullying in that song.
Mm.
So just something, if anybody's interested, to check that out and read the lyrics and see how it relates to that. But so it's about, coping with hardships in life, being honest about the effects that it has on you, and you're also allowed to help yourself out of it, and you're also allowed to, when you can, go ahead and grab life by the balls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, John. So, what's the best place for people to buy this record, this CD?
For people on the US side, Bandcamp, shadowcircus.bandcamp.com. And for anyone in Europe, and though we will ship to anyone in the world, wherever you are, just know that postage is really expensive now. It's like $20 to get a CD across the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
We have, we're working with Just for Kicks, which is our distributor in Europe. So justforkicks.de. And so you can order CDs directly from them. And they're also going to be distributing to some other channels in Europe soon. So look out for that.
Awesome. So, when you, uh, I should say, when someone buys the CD and they put it on, they listen to it all the way through in the dark, maybe with the candle burning and the sound way up. What do you want them to take from that experience? What is your hope as the artist that behind this music? What do you want that person to experience at the end of that 47-ish minutes of music?
I'm hoping that they'll hear a little bit of themselves in it. That that there's something that they can relate to, and that if whether that's something that's like, I was never a big lyric listener myself, so I relate to things more on a sonic level, where I'm like, ooh, this is a sonic world I relate to, or a sonic world I want to be in. So if some of the music or all of it puts somebody in a sonic world that they enjoy being in, that would be great.
All right. I know you talked about your Facebook page, so people can find out about the band on your Facebook page. Where else can they interact with you and learn more about Shadow Circus?
So let's see. Facebook is a great place. We're on Instagram, but and you'll start to see more stuff on Instagram. Definitely watch out and subscribe to us on YouTube, because we're going to be putting out lyric videos for everything we've ever written.
Nice.
And maybe it'll be fun to, I can hint at a future announcement. we're soon going to be re-releasing or we're releasing a completely remixed version of our second album, Whispers and Screams. And so that's also going to come along with a special edition of Project Blue. That's just one song that you can listen to seamlessly. So we can kind of defeat the Spotify notion of just grabbing one song out of the middle of a suite, you know, and you'll also have the option of just listening to it as one whole piece. So we want to have so we'll have a presence for every Shadow Circus song ever published on YouTube.
Nice. I'm looking forward to the radio people one already.
Absolutely, and I have some really fun ideas for that. So
that's a fun song. All right, so I didn't ask you this before about this, but this is self-released and self-produced.
Self-released, and as far as the production, yeah, I mean, the band has always been in charge of its own, you know, mixing and mastering and all that. But our the credit for the production and the engineering side of the production mainly goes to Alex Rapetti, who is an incredibly talented bass player as well as an audio engineer. He's mixed some great albums. His band Infinite Spectrum had toured with Fate's Warning and Eden Song, who are great friends as well. So yeah, listen for anything Alex has done. He's brilliant.
Awesome. So just two more quick questions. I'm sorry to have kept you so long, but this has been a fascinating conversation. I am interested in knowing if I know that the venues for it are limited. Are there plans to play this stuff live somewhere?
Absolutely, there are, and circles back to a question you had asked at the beginning of the interview, where you were like, so you know, why this sound, you know, like format did we pursue? And one of the reasons that we went for a more guitar forward sound is so we can play much more easily. And we can pick up. The Crosby, Stills and Nash once said this. They wanted to be able to knock on someone's door and perform an album. You know, so we're hoping that with this kind of little more of a quartet, you know, kind of sound that we'll be able to pick up and play anywhere.
Okay, great. And then last question. It's not going to be another decade before we get another album, right?
No. And in fact, you're going to be seeing something more akin to what like artists like Peter Gabriel has done, where you may be seeing something from us very soon. And because this album is just a moment, you know, for us, we want to get to the next moment, maybe even within a couple of months, but it'll, you know, kind of like more of the one song at a time format.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to hold you to putting one out every full moon or anything like that.
I appreciate it.
John Fontana from Shadow Circus. It's been a blast talking to you. It's been great catching up with you. You mentioned that we originally met way back when on the Spock's Beard message board. We've met in person and interfaced with each other at what we playfully called Woodstock, which was the Spock's message board gathering in Philadelphia. So that was fun up at Rich Flamini's house and Gary Sauer's place. It's been a lot of fun talking to you about this record. I hope it does really well for you, and I hope your fans that are more into the proggy stuff will at least appreciate what you attempted to do here. If it's not their bag, there's more music on the way soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I didn't realize how long we went, so thanks for letting me yammer on. It's been a blast.
It takes two to yammer, and so I know I'm long-winded as well, but thank you so much for your time. Again, hope it does great for you, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one.